Hello, everybody. All right, let's get started here. So I want to thank everyone for joining our webinar. I'm your host, Brad Sams, the Executive Editor for Petri, and today we're going to be diving deep into building a better backup solution. And today we're going to discuss how to effectively balance performance and cost, understand what makes a high-quality backup solution, and a whole lot more. And we've got a couple great presenters today. Up first, we have Mike Ressler, who is a Microsoft MVP for System Center Cloud and Data Center Management since 2010. He's also a Hyper-V MVP as well since 2014. Moving on, we have Max from the StarWind side, a virtual SAN product manager with 8+ years of experience and over 10 years of experience in the IT industry. And he will be presenting towards the second half of the presentation. And on the Veeam side, we have Ryan Post, who is a system engineer with over 10 years of experience as well. And so during this webinar, we're going to be asking questions, and you'll be able to provide feedback through the polls. And at any time you all have questions for us, please do not hesitate to ask. And at the end of the webinar, we will have a Q&A session where we will try to get all of your questions answered. And for those that we are not, we will do our best to follow up with you. So let's get started here. So the first question we have for everybody, and this is just kind of think about your own backup solution. And you may not know the answer at the top of your head, but how many disk failures can your backup solution sustain before failing? And so you should hopefully see here the votes coming up now. And the options are 1, 2 to 4, and then for C is 5+, or hopefully it's not I don't know, but that actually may be some that may be an actual answer for many people, and that's not too surprising, as most people don't think about their backup solution until it's too late. So we take a quick look at the results here. Most people are saying somewhere between 2 and 4, or a little bit less at 1. 5+ is at 6%, and there's about a quarter of you are saying about 22% of you don't actually know. So just one of the things to keep on the back of your mind is just how many can you actually sustain before you have complete failure. So with that question out of the way, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to pass it on over to Mike.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good evening, or good afternoon, depending on the time zone that you're in. For your information, I'm straight here from Belgium. Well, you know, going virtually, coming from Belgium. So it's rather late here. But not too late yet to start talking about the 3-2-1 rule. And whenever you're doing data protection, whenever you're thinking about making sure you got backups, this is the rule you have to live by. So let's have a quick look on what the rule is before I actually give the stage back to some other experts who are going to go more deeper into specific solutions. This part is more about a specific rule that you have to look at whenever you're designing your backup or your data protection strategy. So let's have a quick look. What I'm going to show you, I'm going to show you what the 3-2-1 rule is, and then I might do something a little bit strange to many, but I'm going to talk about layers and possibilities. I'm not going to talk about backup alone. I'm going to talk about all different types of techniques, of possibilities that you can use to make sure that you live by that 3-2-1 rule. But it will all become clear the moment I'm actually over there. So, what is the 3-2-1 rule? If we're going to look at the history, this is, you know, just a little bit of fun, but as far as we know it, this is actually invented by a photographer and not by some IT guy. Now, you got a URL on here, and I am convinced you can download the slides so you can actually look at that URL where you can see the history, how it actually works. Now, this guy was also famous for his words of saying there are two kinds of people in this world, those who have had a hard drive failure and those who will. And I'm pretty sure many of us can relate to that. If you didn't have a hard drive failure yet, be sure it will be coming. And if you already had one, well, you know, pretty sure another one will come as well. But this guy had some issues. And one of his issues was that he was a professional photographer. He had a lot of digital pictures, and he wanted to know how he could safeguard those in case something went wrong with his desktop or his laptop or his devices or whatever. So what he came up with is that he always wanted to keep at least 3 copies of its data, and that's where the 3 stands for. 3 copies meaning 1 production and 2 copies of that data. Now in IT we would like to call that backup, but if you look into the mind of Peter, the photographer, for him it was literally copying a picture to another location on that same hard drive. Now afterwards, of course, he realized that that wasn't the smartest move to do, because if that same hard drive failed, he still would have lost his 2 copies. So then he decided to store at least one of these copies on 2 different media. Lately, if you look back in IT now, this has become a serious discussion point, and we have seen companies that when they say 2 different media, they don't mean 2 separate hardware boxes, they actually mean 2 different media. It still can be 2 different disk types, but for example, it can't be a SAN of brand A running operating system A, but the second media should then be a SAN of brand B running operating system B. So even that, they are looking at the differences, because you never know in these operating systems that something is wrong and all of your data is corrupt. And then finally, the 1 stands for keep 1 backup copy off-site. Now, off-site can be seen, as many things. It can be on tape, it can be to the cloud, it can be another data center, and so on. As long as it's somewhere away from where your production data is living, you're keeping a copy off-site. And we kind of like to add the 0 as well, because what we've seen in the past is that the moment you start taking copies of that production, that you're spreading them around different media, going off-site. But, when you took the first copy, there actually was somewhere a corruption inside, or it failed to take that copy of that backup or that replica or whatever. So we wanted to make sure that we don't have errors in that, otherwise you can't recover anyway. So we like to add a 0 in there, meaning that the moment you take your first copy, you're going to do some sort of checking on it. However you're going to do it, but you're going to do some sort of checking on it to make sure that one is completely correct and can be used to recover in worst case scenario. So 3-to-1 rule, backup to a folder, and this is more or less what Peter has designed. Backup to a folder, do it to another folder on another disk, and keep it in the safe, or maybe today, as he is using it more or less today, put it on one of these cloud services like OneDrive or Dropbox or Google Cloud. Now, of course, as I said, this is a photographer. In IT, we look at things a little bit differently. So 3 copies of your data. We take 1 copy of the production. We already said this. Could be your virtual machines on VMware, Hyper-V, from your physical server. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take another copy of your data. Ideally, that 3rd copy would of course come from that, that 2nd copy would of course come from that 1st copy, not to disturb your production environment twice, but know that in some cases it might be needed that you take that copy twice from that production, which of course doubles the load, and in case you're working with transaction logging or something like that, you really need to take that into account. Now, most of the time, taking 3 copies is the easiest part. But then we're going to look at the 2 different media. And then more and more discussions are coming up when you look at a strategy. Now, your first will probably run somewhere on production storage, highly scalable maybe. You probably made a decision between a lot of storage, paying a lot of money, or maybe you want real performance, have less storage, and then look at some slower storage for other types. That is, of course, a discussion you need to make, but that is your production. The other media I can use is, as I already said, tape. Could be just a bunch of disks, cheap storage, but big storage where you can keep a lot of data for a long retention period on it. And although if it's cheap, it's slower, it's still rather fast when you need to do a restore compared, for example, to tapes, or compared to when you need to download files from the cloud. So you can make some choices in this one, and what we see a lot is that when you look at your primary storage, that many people will take their first copy or their first backup onto that same primary storage or their first backup storage is rather expensive as well. Just to make sure that that process, the disturbance on the production environment is as minimal as possible. And then from there on, they will move it to slower media because then at that time, it isn't that important anymore how many resources are needed. Looking at the offsite part, again, pretty simple. You start with your production data and then you can make some choices. Co-location is a possibility. Your own secondary data center is a possibility. You've got the cloud, and then of course you have still tape. I know many people will say tape is still dead, but in reality it's still being used a lot, and there's still a lot of improvements as well. So that is still a very, very valid medium. Just a quick on what about tape? What are the advantages? As of today, still best price per gigabyte. No power that you need to use. You know, I am from Belgium, so energy prices in Europe are rather high. Every power that we need to use, electricity, cooling, and so on, for us is rather expensive. So the less we use, the better it is, you know, for the wallet of our company. On the other hand, of course, it's got downsides. It's got those manual activities to be sent offsite. You know, you give it to your driver somewhere, it gets lost, and so on. And when you need to restore, it probably won't be that fast because by the time you get the tapes back from offsite, they're loaded into the libraries and so on. Well, it takes quite some time. Other options, remote sites. But plus means you own everything. It's disk-based. Restore can still be quickly. You can even use that remote site in worst case as a failover site or something. But on the other hand, you need to maintain two sites. And if you have worked with the chief financial officer for quite a few years, you probably know he doesn't like capital expenses. He's more of a fan of operational expenses. So that is something they do not like. And, you know, you've got all that expenses for something that you hope you never need to use. Co-location, kind of the same thing as a secondary data center, with the difference that it's not all capital expenses. You kind of have the rental of the building, so you don't need to maintain the cooling and the electricity and staff and things like that over there. On the other hand, you still need to maintain it, and in most cases with co-location, you still have those capital expenses because you're going to buy hardware that you're going to store in that location, and that is normally rarely used as well. Finally, we've got the cloud. Everybody is talking about the cloud. No difference at that point. No expenses for building or hardware, pay-as-you-go model. Away goes the complexity in many cases because it's just uploading the changes whenever the backup is done and you're taking your secondary copy. And in many cases, most service providers will give you seed and collect services for this very large transfers. At first sight, it seems the best choice you can have, but don't forget you're still uploading a lot. You probably need to download at a certain moment. Talk very carefully with your service provider when you're going to go for this, because what is actually happening with your data, where is it stored, what about the encryption, what are these things, and depending on what type of service you're using, meaning you can just use some storage somewhere in a cloud and then the time to recover will be slow and can be extremely slow. If you combine it with compute, then you probably have a good recovery time. But on the other hand, that you will see that the price of that will increase massively. And, you know, if the price increases as well, then you probably have some other solutions that you can use also. So you got options, but you really have to look what your idea around is, and you need to make that decision. That being said, let's look a little bit to the layers and the possibilities, because one solution cannot fit all. I know many people, when I talk about the 3-2-1 rule, they say, okay, can I do everything with my backup solution? Now, some solutions might be able to do it, but you have to look at from a bigger picture in your environment. So let's look at some multiple layers. Let's look at a tiered approach. So we have different tiers, different technologies we're going to use. We're going to kind of neutralize the downsides of a specific tier by using another tier. And think about statistics. I really like those one because it tells me that files that are rarely reopened, over 66% are reopened, 95% fewer than 5 times. And reopens are mostly temporarily related. What it means exactly is that when you design your strategy and you look at recovery time objective and you want that to be as fast as possible, then you actually only have to look at the first part of your entire strategy. That means you can use tapes, no problem, because what happens is that 95% of your restores will probably be files that are not older than 7 days, which means they're in your first tier of your backend. And with that, you can start looking at all of these different tiers. Now, my first tier is something that many people forget. It's called application protection. The first defense of your data starts within the application. Think, if you look at some Microsoft applications here, at Active Directory deleted items, SQL log transaction inside SQL Server, SharePoint deleted items, versioning, email deleted items, and think of all the applications you run, all the workloads you run in your environment that actually have those kind of inside out-of-the-box protection. That should be your first tier where you're looking at. It could be 7 days, 14 days, depending on your needs. It's got some downsides, of course. If the app fails, you might lose that as well. But, you know, for quick recoveries, this is actually a very handy tier. Now, the second tier, which I call tier 0, is storage snapshots. This one is high frequency copies, low impact on the production side. But, you know, it's got some downsides as well. Single point of failure. It consumed the production storage, and you know, most of the time that is pretty expensive storage. In most cases, there's no application consistency. So there are some downsides there as well, but it's got the upsides of low impact on the hypervisor, very fast restore, and it leverages the performance of that storage. Tier 1 is small and fast JBoss. What does it offer you? Simply fast restores. Hold a few restore points, 7 days, 14 days, maybe 3 weeks, because as I said, the most restores come from that last week, from the last couple of weeks. And this could be just, you know, a nice server with Windows or a Linux on it or something like that. Just jam some disks in it, mix some SSD and some HDD, you know, for some better performance. And there you've got a great solution to send off backups or replicas or something like that. And then another tier that you can add to is very large but cheap disk storage. And that means, you know, we're going to keep half a year. We're going to keep a year on disk, maybe in that off-site location or something, but something that has low dollars per gigabyte, right? And then finally, we've got that third tier, which is the off-site archival, which could be your tape and which could be your cloud as well. But again, think about it, dumb storage base, active component, tape might be much cheaper, but you got those manual activities. So that is a thing. And then finally, if you're going to look and bring everything together, then you're kind of getting this overall design. Now, I haven't added tier -1 here with the application, but you can add it here as well. But you're going to see tier 0, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and then you're going to see RTO goes up or RPO goes down, but you know, the price and the space are going to go equally as well. So depending on your budgets, you're going to have to look at all of these tiers and try to combine as much as you can to bring that overall data protection, to bring that overall 3-2-1 rule into your environment. And you might be surprised how much of these different items you already have in your environment, already paid for, but you're just not using it specifically for this strategy. So what is my dream? My dream is that we have our production side. We use tier -1 on the application layer. Unfortunately, not every application supports this, but those that do, I use it. We got tier 0 here. We take some production snapshots, combine that maybe with our backup solution. We bring that to a tier 1 and then maybe to a tier 2 or tier 3 tape or cloud. And with that said, I'm going to give the word back to Brett.
All right, thank you for all that. We're going to jump into the second question here, and the question is, how confident are you in your backup solution? So the answers or options are highly confident, lacking confidence, or not confident. Hopefully everybody is confident, but we all know that backup solutions are sometimes newly implemented, and hopefully when you newly implement them, you're highly confident in them. But we also know that some people have some backup solutions that have been sitting around for a very long time, and people just assume that they work. So we've got about half the people voted so far, and everybody's mostly saying about 65% as confident. 19% currently are highly confident, 15% lacking confidence, and 2% are being completely honest and saying not confident at all. And as the kind of votes trickle in here, most people are saying they're confident, and then it's split between highly confident and lacking confidence, which is good, is that most people are on the positive end, but clearly people are being completely honest, which is good, in saying that their backup solutions definitely could use a little bit of help. And if you do have any questions, again, along the way, make sure to ask them, and we will gather them up and present them at the end. So let's keep the train moving here, and let's go to the next slide. And we're going to pass it off to Max.
Hi. Thank you. So I actually wanted to take a step back and do a small intro in why we actually do backup. Because people tend to make things redundant. People tend to get successful with everything they do. And as the quote here says, failure is not an option. And that's our typical motto in business. For those who don't have a motto, that's something their boss says to them, because failure is not an option, otherwise you're fired. And that is a good motivator for making things work and making things actually work as you plan them to. And backups and restores haven't been always robust like we see them today. We just saw 2% are not confident, so unfortunately you're not in the positive crowd yet, but you'll definitely get there. But backups haven't been always reliable like that. You know what was the result in 48% of restores back in 2007? Back in 2007, when you try to do a restore, 48% that you get this picture. Not good at all. I agree. So, and has this number improved? Yes, it did. And that's good. In 2007, it was 48% failures. Now, these days, according to other research, it's almost 90% success. Now, 48 and 90 don't play well together on this slide, but here are some good results. 48 to 90, most of the attendees here statistically are already successful. But on the other side, 10% of our attendees here are prone to restore failures. So next time you have a blackout and you're restoring a database, we now have more than 100 people here. So more than 10 of our attendees are statistically prone not to restore something during the next failure. And I hope that never happens to you and any of your friends, but statistics is a main thing. And what we're trying to do is to overplay it. And that's why StarWind offers an alternative way of getting your backup infrastructure more reliable. And that's why we started the whole story with backup combination of StarWind storage and Veeam backup on top. Now, what would be our typical ways to avoid failure in a backup environment? First, we need to have a clear plan of your backup strategy. That's something seemingly obvious. Many people just think, okay, I'll just go with what our consultant said or what the salesperson at the backup company said. Often the salespersons in the backup company and the actual backup engineers are really different. And you don't want to hear that advice. Then, second one is test your backups. Whenever you do a backup, it's a good idea to test it. If you don't do it every day, Do it once in a while. Number 3, seriously, test them once in a while, just as I said. And number 4, make sure that your hardware works well and you do not get an email in the middle of the night from your server saying, hey, your 8.5 was too slow to accommodate all the load you're putting on the system. So you don't have any backups for this night. You only have backups since last night. And now you can't really fall asleep back because if something happens, you don't have your strategy for recovery pointed check. If you don't have your today's backup, you only have yesterday's backup. This is something you want to avoid, was making your backup hardware reliable. And this is actually where StarWind jumps in. And our idea here is to create a redundant storage solution for your backup environment. Now, some of the people already do that for their primary storage. Some people don't do that for their primary storage. And there are a lot of pros and cons, and there are a lot of variables. But in a lot of organizations, backups are critical. There is a lot of human factor. There are a lot of natural issues in certain states or in certain areas of the world. And it's a good idea to make the backup infrastructure reliable, fast, and redundant. And what StarWind does in this particular case, we take 2 industry standard servers filled with drives and basically mirror the drive space between those servers and then present that as a single NFS or SMB3 share to external clients. This share is then used for Veeam backup to store the virtual machine backups and also to restore from those. And should anything happen, your data is reliable and always available from StarWind storage. Now, in the beginning, we asked how many drives can your backup solution lose before it goes offline. In our case, this solution can lose more than 4 drives, actually up to 4, the minimum config, and still be available. So even if you're putting your backup on the high capacity, low performance spindles, and the vendor you chose has a higher drive failure rate than the average on the market, you can still be sure that your data is still there and there is a way to restore your virtual machines. Now, on top of that, as a cherry on the cake, we add performance to that storage. So whenever you decide to spin up a virtual machine from backup directly, we are able to do that. Something you can never do from a tape backup, or you can never do from a small NAS box you use for backups. So this is a faster solution which partially covers your need to spin up part of your production in the event of failure as well. A question you may ask here, is there an additional CapEx involved in implementing StarWind solution in the backup environment? And technically, the solution we offer for mirroring the storage and doing a performance boost for your environment is completely free of charge. So this is the version which covers 2 servers, allows you to make your backup infrastructure more reliable, makes it faster, and makes it more robust. And yet, costs you nothing but the hardware you may already have in your environment. If not, there are a lot of ways to get a commodity server with big number of drive slots and get yourself a reliable backup solution easily. With that, I would like to get the conversation and the presentation back to our webinar host, and thank you for your attention.
Alrighty, here, let's see, we are on to the next question, which is, how frequently do you test your backups for completeness? This is actually a pretty real-life example. I was with a client who claimed that their backups were perfect, And when actually things went south and they went to restore everything, they found out approximately 35% of their backup data was corrupted with each backup. So it's very obviously important that you want to test your backups, but it's one of those things that if you don't really test them too often, because you just assume they're complete, they can come back to bite you during that critical restore process. And so we've got a little over 20% of the people voting so far, and most are saying it's over 12 months that they test them. So that's a pretty long lag period between testing, but obviously if you know that the process is working, you should hope that it works consistently. But we've actually got a really even spread on the results so far. The answers for 0 to 3 months is at 22% now, 3 to 6 months at 24, 6 to 12 at 18%, and over 12 months is actually now representing a little over a third. So yeah, so testing your backups for completeness, obviously a critical task that not many of us think about, and it's one of those things that if you don't test them on the regular, on some sort of regimented schedule, that it can come back to bite you. And with that, I want to keep things moving along here, although we're doing well on time. And so the final results here roughly actually about 22% at 0 to 3, 24 for 3 to 6, 18 for 6 to 12, and 36 over the time. So I'm going to pass it along, I believe, to Ryan now, and who is going to talk more about the Veeam Availability Suite.
Great. Thank you, Brad. So,
yep.
Yeah, just to kind of start off real quick, we are going to focus, with backup and replication, right, and be able to really leverage the StarWind, capabilities there for a backup target. But for anybody in the audience that is new to Veeam backup and replication is our bread and butter, right? That is our cornerstone product. But just to keep your eyes open when you are doing some research on your own, we do offer some monitoring and reporting tools. We have a point solution with Veeam One that does install on a Windows server to bring in all the different metrics that you'd want to see from a VMware architecture, Hyper-V architecture, but it also brings in that advanced monitoring point for Veeam backup and replication. Whereas we have the same type of product with what we call our Veeam Management Pack for System Center Operations Manager. So as the name implies there, it is leveraging that framework of System Center Operations Manager to bring in all the similar data from VMware, Hyper-V, as well as Veeam backup and replication. So all sorts of alerting capabilities, capacity planning, resource optimization you are able to get with that. And that's what we would call the Veeam Availability Suite to really help provide your needs for what we call the modern data center. Right? When you start talking about the modern data center, you have users asking for their data all the time, so they really need that 24/7 access. Right? And we need to have that little downtime as well. If something goes down, they expect you to have it up and running a lot quicker. And then you also have to be able to handle the data growth. So over the next couple of years, you're going to see anywhere potentially from 30 to 50% data growth. So be able to handle that growth with that. So with that availability suite that I just mentioned, protecting your environment with Veeam backup and replication, leveraging our monitoring tools that we have, and that's really going to help you, bridge that availability gap. Making sure that everything is covered from resource optimization to ensure little downtime, but also that 24/7 access and really helping your environment grow as needed. Right? But really with Veeam backup and replication itself, right? It's an easy and powerful solution because it does start with a 15 to 20-minute setup. Right, we install on a Windows server. Can be virtual, can be physical. We just require that it is a 64-bit OS of Windows. Right. So in regards to our solution, we are agentless. Right. So one of the biggest things you're going to see with our solution compared to other solutions out there, especially those legacy ones, is there's nothing that's having to be purchased, deployed, or managed on a virtual machine in order to back up or replicate it. And also included with that is built-in deduplication and compression. So the ability to achieve those smaller backup files, save on disk space, and keep more store points for the long run. All right. So I do want to talk a little bit about architecture while I have this up here on the screen. We talked about the Veeam server itself, the 64-bit OS of Windows. We also have what we call backup proxy servers. These are the heavy lifters, the data movers of gathering the data from production storage, doing the dedupe, doing the compression, and then sending that information to the third piece of the architecture here, the backup repository. And that great option is, Max has already talked about, the StarWind implementation there with the virtual SAN. So to kind of tie in, obviously what Mike has already talked about, achieving that 3-2-1 capability. And one way that we do it is with that first slide of the architecture, backing up locally, right? But we also have what we call backup copy jobs, and that ability to take backups from the primary backup repository and then moving them to a secondary backup repository of whatever type of storage that may be. The great thing about a backup copy job is that it's completely independent retention compared to what you've already created locally, right? When you start looking at say, that small fast JBOD or that StarWind repository for local, and then going off-site to something slower, that tier 2 storage that's larger, a lot more capacity because you want to keep more attention, and that goes hand in hand with the GFS style retention. Be able to set up a weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly to meet any of the retention needs that you may be tied to. If it's any sort of HIPAA requirements or SOX requirements. All right, we talked about it can be local, can be off-site. Depending on where you need that data to be, it can be both. Again, 3-2-1, achieving that redundancy of how many copies of your backups you may have. But we also have, Cloud Connect repositories where maybe you don't have a remote office to go off-site to. Maybe you don't have a colo location. Something we did implement into Veeam Backup Replication in version 8 for our Veeam service providers is to provide a target for customers, right, to send their backups to them. The great thing about Cloud Connect is these service providers, they are leveraging Veeam for other backup needs for their customers, for their hosted infrastructure. So they can restore your backups into their data center if needed based on, the agreement you have with them, right, and how much space requirements and all that great stuff. So they can help you calculate that. And this is great for anyone that has a single location, no remote offices, no co-locations where they're maybe renting some space. But the biggest thing is having the communication set up between, 2 locations for a backup repository to another backup repository. Now, we also have the ability to leverage tape as well. All right, with our tape support, it does assist with that long archiving offsite. Right, Mike made a few good points that it's going to give you the best price per gigabyte. But from a restore perspective, it may not be the best option because once those tapes are offsite, you're going to have to bring them back. And if you have to go get that single file from a tape that just left, it may take a little bit to get that back to be able to get that. Now, we do support single tape drives. We also support libraries. So when you start looking into the Veeam architecture with tape, a couple things that we require. Windows Server that has the attachment of the tape device, a Windows driver installed for that tape device. And as long as it's LTO3 or newer, we should be able to add that into the Veeam infrastructure, and you should be able to leverage it. And then once you have sent tapes off-site, we can vault so you can keep track of what's been sent off-site and know exactly what you need to grab back when that needs to happen. Now, one thing we haven't talked about much, in regards to that 3-2-1 rule, is a little bit better of a disaster recovery capability, and I always like to throw it out there, is that there is replication built into Veeam, right? It may not be, it's not the same because it's not a backup going to tape. It's not a backup going to another backup repository. We're actually going to help you create a one-to-one copy of a virtual machine into another VMware, into another Hyper-V architecture. So it is one-to-one. It does require more space, right? So it's going to be the fastest recovery in a disaster because those VMs are ready to go. And whether it's just a single host you want to throw at the DR site, as long as there's enough RAM, CPU, and data store space, that's all we really require. It can be from different hardware to different hardware. We're not reliant on any sort of underlying SAN-to-SAN replication. And I believe, StarWind has some great, hyper-converged stuff that could help with that, as far as a solution for offsite architecture. So, but really from there, fast backups is important, right? You need to shrink that backup window, especially if you're really looking to achieve a certain recovery time objective or recovery point objective, right? RPO, making sure you have enough restore points throughout the day. And the way that we do that with Veeam is with those proxies. We talked about those, fitting them into the infrastructure. Whether you're going to put them part of the SAN fabric to get the fastest backups, maybe you have a 10 gig backbone for your main infrastructure, so we can leverage that with our network mode. We also talked about, with Mike talking about tier 0, those storage snapshots. We actually have some integration when you start looking at your production storage, and right now with HP, with NetApp, we have some stuff coming in version 9 with some other vendors to leverage those from a source. So we're not having to leverage a VMware snapshot. So yes, this is a VMware-only feature, but is really increasing those backup times, taking advantage of that. But you also have options for backup repositories, but really, the focus here today is looking at that best cost per performance ratio. And you're really going to get that, as Max mentioned, that StarWind capability is 0, so 0 cost. So you may have some hardware sitting around collecting dust, and that's a great option. Maybe throw some newer disks in there, but then you have a great backup repository to really have that performance and take advantage of a lot of the great restore features that Veeam has. And again, that's moving into fast recovery. Instant Veeam recovery is the fastest way that Veeam is able to restore a virtual machine. Right? We can have it up and running, run it from that backup source. So that's another key place where the performance that you're going to have with the StarWind solution is going to be able to enable that quicker than, say, a USB hard drive or maybe a consumer level SAN, right? Or NAS device, right? So having the better performance, let's get it up and running quickly, reduce that downtime for users. So improving the recovery time objective or RTO. We also have the ability to do one-click file restores, going in quickly, finding the file that you'd like, and restoring it directly back. Right. And then also think about your applications. Active Directory, SQL, Exchange, SharePoint. We have explorers for these to be able to go in right to our backup, grab that individual email, grab that individual document for SharePoint, or go back to a certain transaction in SQL or a user in Active Directory. We can restore directly, and the faster backup storage you have, the faster we're going to be able to restore those items. So a couple other useful features we have. Sure Backup, we've talked about that. One of the poll questions, how often have you tested your backups? How often do you do that? Well, we make it easy within Veeam. We can take a isolated environment, what we call a virtual lab, and just like instant Veeam recovery, running VMs from their backup file, we can put them right into the isolated environment, and we can test the virtual machine itself. We can test the applications, test the OS, and they're going to get a nice little report letting you know that everything was successful. We can also do that for the replicated virtual machines, right? Put those into an isolated environment and test that failover process to make sure that those are working as well. So again, making it easier for you to do this, and from a backup perspective, leveraging faster backup repository, the redundancy there that you have. Veeam Backup Enterprise Manager, we do have a web interface, allows for file level restore capabilities, allows for application restore capabilities, but giving that task, say, to your help desk associates, not having to spend your time logging into the Veeam server to do all that. And then we talked about the Availability Suite. Making sure that everything else is optimized correctly, everything from the data stores. You're not hitting any latency issues. You're being alerted on that before issues really happen. So keep in mind with all that all together, you're going to have everything protected with Veeam Backup Replication, but alerting, optimizing with either Veeam 1 or a Veeam Management Pack for System Center. And really just to end off here, we do have just a quick sneak peek into version 9 to talk about here. We're really improving our remote office, branch office structure when you have many other smaller locations that may have a small virtual infrastructure. It's going to help with restore capabilities, having, say, one central Veeam server for easier management. We talked about the Explorers for fast recovery. We're including Oracle with that within version 9. So having that granular recovery within Oracle and the log backups there. The Cloud Connect right? When you don't have a remote office, you don't have a co-location, maybe with VMware architecture. Those Veeam service providers, well, they're going to allow you to replicate virtual machines directly via one single port into their infrastructure and allow for seamless failover, failback when needed. And then lastly, we have our EMC integration. We talked about the storage snapshots currently to help with backups, but also be able to restore from those as well for any other snapshots you're already taking. So, with that being said, thanks for hearing me talk about Veeam here for a couple minutes, and we'll pass that on over back to Brad for a last question.
All right, let's get at it. It's the last question here. When was the last time you reviewed your backup procedures? This is another one of the fun aspects of the backup process, is making sure that you actually have it well documented, because I don't think anyone would really agree that disasters happen on your own schedule. And in the event that you're on a nice tropical beach and something happens, you want to make sure that all of your backup procedures and documentation are actually well defined so that people can follow your orders or whatever needs to be done. And so it's actually votes are still coming in here. All right, so a little bit on average here, it looks like most people are saying within the last 3 months. That's actually really, really good. I mean, obviously, reviewing this type of stuff is pretty high priority, and it seems pretty clear that people like to take beach vacations, so they make sure that documentation is up to snuff, so that when you are on the beach, you do not get interrupted by a nasty phone call saying that everything is down and the server center is on fire. So good for everybody, actually. That's much, much better than I was actually thinking would be. So just kind of close it up here on the votes. So it looks like at least over half within the last 6 months, and then there are a few trailing down in the 6 to 12 to 12 plus. Now we do have some questions here that I'm going to ask to our presenters, because they are much more educated in this than I am, so getting their feedback would be good. So the first question here, it says hardware snapshots were mentioned as a tier 0 backup option. What is the process with StarWind for leveraging hardware snapshots for tier 0 backups? What is the process for restoring data from a StarWind hardware snapshot?
So with StarWind in this particular configuration, there needs to be dividing between restoring from StarWind and the Veeam snapshot. So technically, StarWind here is used just as a storage. So definitely Veeam sends the request back to the storage when the virtual machine needs to restore. But if there's a backup, it's not getting the VSS commands most of the time. So we are only talking about restore processes there. And with restores, StarWind speeds up the backup storage by adding the RAM caching on top of the solution, and also by aggregating the reads from both arrays we have in the setup. So instead of one set of drives, you're actually using 2 sets of drives. So this aggregates the reads, and then the RAM caching aggregates the writes.
Perfect. And Maxwell, I've got your attention here. Another question came in while you were presenting. It says, so you're talking about running StarWind on your backup targets and not your production servers?
One does not exclude the other in this particular case. So with StarWind used in the production system, you are also okay to use StarWind on the backup system. However, just from the sanity standpoint, if you use StarWind on the production storage, that means it is already highly available. So there is a high chance that you don't really need that much of the resilience on the backup storage, only in cases when your infrastructure is really prone to human error and there is absolutely no chance you can lose that data. So it's still viable to have StarWind on both production storage and backup storage. It's just the amount of scenarios where it's not an overkill.
Perfect. And then one more for you here, and we've got a couple more we'll move on to, but it says, does StarWind plan to make a standalone appliance version of its virtual SAN versus needing to be installed with Windows?
So right now we do have a standalone appliance. So it's not a Linux-based appliance. It's still Windows-based, but it plays with any other hypervisor. It's just acting as the virtual storage appliance in this particular case. So at this point you can use StarWind with Hyper-V, vSphere, Xen, KVM. So Xen and KVM is something we're testing right now, but we are already selling appliances with vSphere and with Hyper-V, powered by StarWind.
Perfect. I think this next one here is probably for Ryan. It says, does Veeam use storage snapshots hardware VSS provider when used with StarWind?
We should, I believe so. And Max, you might need to correct me if I'm wrong here, but y'all do have a hardware VSS provider, and as long as that Hyper-V sees it, we should call on that to initiate a hardware VSS provided snapshot just due to the Hyper-V APIs.
Yes, yes. Especially when StarWind is used as the primary storage. I mean, if you're using StarWind as a backup storage, you're not doing any sort of VSS there. You're just using it as a hard drive. Yeah. And yeah, go ahead.
Okay, perfect.
That worked good, yeah.
Yep, perfect. Next question here is scaling with proxies. How many proxies on average would you require for 1,000 virtual backup clients?
Yeah, that's definitely a question. I mean, that would probably need a lot more information to answer. I mean, as far as what the infrastructure looks like. And how the proxies would be set up all kind of plays into that. I mean, that's definitely something to get in contact, with, the Veeam sales team to go into that type of discussion. I would say, with about 1,000 virtual machines, I mean, if you went with a physical proxy where we can leverage our direct SAN access, and depending on how beefy you make those physical proxies, I mean, it could potentially be done, with 4 or 5 to throw out a number. But again, that's nothing that should be written down and held to the standard. So definitely more in-depth conversation with a Veeam system engineer would be best for that.
Perfect. And I think, Mike, if you're still with us, this last question might be perfect for you because you know a little bit more about this. It says, how does this product or these products compare to StorSimple?
I think it's kind of, comparing two products to each other, which isn't really a good thing here. What StorSimple from Microsoft does is kind of a specific box that where you have some production environment on, maybe use it as a backup environment as well. I know Veeam is certified specifically to use StorSimple as a target, but then in the end what I will do, it is going to move archived data or older data. It's going to move it to a Azure storage subscription. So what you have kind of there is kind of a hybrid storage box that takes data inside. You can run production stuff on it, but everything which is older and archived will be moved into the cloud and returned when necessary. I find it kind of difficult to compare those two solutions to each other. I think they're kind of playing in a different area. That is more my vision on this one.
Alrighty, well that was the last of the major questions that we had. I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and we will let the winner of the $500 Amazon gift card know here shortly once we pick a winner about who that is, and we will contact you through via email. But thanks again to everybody for attending, and thank you to all the speakers. We very much appreciate your time. And you can always check out all the latest on Petri.com, and you can check out all of our webinars by the little red tab in the top right corner, and hope to see you again soon. Thanks, everybody.